Hey, Blondie here with another I Feel Like Playing. This time it's another game on the Sega CD, and this is for 16-bit Winter, and this will be the last 16-bit Winter game. The reason why I'm doing all these now is because I want to get 16-bit Winter done, and it ends at the end of March, so I just want to get this done, but this will be the last one. Anyway, this is the Terminator for Sega CD. The intro here just shows highly compressed and low frame rate digitized footage from the actual movie, The Terminator. Of course, because this is on the Sega CD, it's not that good quality. But then again, this is actually appropriate given that this is a movie tie-in game, so at least it's appropriate FMV footage. And speaking of which, this is actually one of the better movie tie-in games. And this is just telling us the story, but if you know what The Terminator is, you pretty much already know what the story is, so... This game was actually given to me by Angel Halo at last year's Kineticon. He always frequently goes to a video game store that has a lot of games, and he figured he'd get this for me because, well, I don't have that many good Sega CD games, and I thank him a lot for that. And this is pretty cool. It actually has a rendition of the main theme, which is pretty close to the actual main one. And it actually shows credits like in the movies. It's basically just like the movie. It's a movie credit sequence. So both in terms of quality and keeping true to the source material, this is definitely one of the better movie licensed games, especially back then, back in like '93, because the other Terminator games at the time were, well, pretty shitty. And even the more recent Terminator games are pretty shitty. In fact, the only other decent Terminator games I've played were the Terminator Salvation game on the arcade. And with this, I'm just going to go on easy, because this game is actually pretty challenging, and there really isn't much of a difference with the endings, like regarding the ending when you play the game. The difficulty just factors in how much damage you take, how many enemies there are, etc. And the intro FMV just shows us that, hey, it's the future and there's war going on. So the game is a side-scrolling shooter. You play as Kyle Reese throughout the events of the Terminator movie, starting out with the war in the future. Your rifle starts out not automatic. You basically have to mash the B button to fire it. However, you have to time it correctly in order to fire it at its most efficiency, I guess you could say. Because simply mashing it will, sometimes your firing won't work. It's basically determined on how many shots you can fire at once. And the best way to deal with most Terminators, I find, is to duck and then shoot. Because most shots they shoot will shoot over your head. And there's other power-ups to collect as well. There's gun power-ups, which will power up your gun after you collect enough of them. There are grenades in this level, which I'll show in a minute here. And one thing is that the aiming is not as fluent as, say, Contra or any other side-scrolling shooter like that. Your aiming is a little bit limited, but grenades can help there. Grenades can help a great deal with, like with any situation, sometimes if you're not able to hit enemies in certain angles. And we got a power-up now that our gun is fully automatic. And the best way to deal with most Terminators is to exploit and take your time. That way you can hit them as far away as you can and as many hits as you can without them directly aiming at you. This game actually does force you to be pretty strategic in your aiming and shooting, because the Terminators can take several hits, and even though on easy you can take a fair amount of damage, they can still pretty much drain your health, because Kyle Reese does not have very much invincibility time. In fact, he doesn't really have any invincibility time, like at all, because if you get hit, you can still continuously get hit by other fire and shots and stuff. And that's the same thing when you get close to enemies. because there isn't really an invisibility buffer at all, because you can still get hit repeatedly when you're like right by a Terminator. Luckily, there are plenty of medkits you can find all over the place. And, however, there are actually enemies and bosses later on that can kill you in one hit. So, yeah. You definitely don't want to get up close and personal with the enemies in this game. Being reckless is not the way to go in this game. The soundtrack here is done by Tommy Tallarico, and it's quite excellent, as you can hear. If the Sega CD is universally good at one thing, is its CD technology, which was pretty new at the time, especially with most music. Now, here you can actually climb up and down this thing in the background, which you probably wouldn't have figured out at first if you didn't know, because it does just look like a part of the background. And we just go down there and we get quite a few one-ups for our trouble. I will admit that this level is a little bit odd because everything is red here. To me, it seems like we're in the realm of the Virtual Boy or something like that. Oh, and that power up there is it's a bulletproof vest, which gives you invulnerability for a short time. Like I said, everything is red. It's like a Virtual Boy game almost. However, it seems like it reminds me of this one commercial for the Virtual Boy where it's basically a dystopian future, and someone was getting chased by like a Virtual Boy. So it's pretty funny that way that a Virtual Boy would come and run around and force people to play it because, you know, it was not that good. And this oddly fits in with, you know, the Terminator and all this. There's also quite a bit of platforming in this game. The platforming is actually handled pretty good in this game. Kyle's jumping is pretty responsive, though later on I seem to have a little bit of difficulty with the responsiveness of his jumping, but we'll get into that later. Those beacons we also run into are checkpoints in case you die, which are always good. There's also no continues for this game, so it is best to try and get as many one-ups as possible. And since we can't aim down, grenades will work in a pinch there. And you have to be careful here because this thing will come out, and if that hits you, you instantly die. And there's also pits that you can fall down and die too. So just be wary of that. And we just cleared the first stage. And we got a pretty standard scoring system as well, if you ever care about scoring in any of these old games. Loading! That frame rate. So, the cutscenes don't really add to anything. It's just showing clips of the movies, just showing us that, hey, this is where you are in the movie, roughly. So, yeah. They're kind of pointless, but at the same time, it's like, hey, it's a movie license game, whatever. Loading. Okay, now we're in the second stage, and I threw a grenade accidentally. Well, at least we're out of the red area, and we now have, like, bluish skies, which is actually more true to the actual color scheme in the movie, but whatever. And we have some lovely skulls in the foreground as well. This stage is pretty standard, too. All the stages are actually fairly standard, like, run-and-gun action platforming, but they're not necessarily bad. And none of the aiming and anything is really that stiff, either. And there's these enemies that are introduced as well, and I think are only in this level. There's these big spider things. I don't remember if they were actually in the movie or not. Maybe they were. I don't know, it's been a little while since I've seen the actual movie, The Terminator, so you'll have to forgive me if I make some mistakes now and then. And we have some more platforming, which is, again, pretty standard and pretty responsive. And some pretty good music, too. And with this thing, I just run. You can take quite a bit of damage if you don't get there quickly. I think there is a way to avoid getting hit, but I just sort of just bum rushed my way through that part. Also, when you keep in mind that ducking and shooting most Terminators won't work sometimes, because sometimes they'll aim slightly lower, and even if you duck, you'll get, hit in the face by bullets. With that, you can actually jump to avoid most shots like that, but to me, it's easier to just take a 50-50 chance and just like duck to avoid every time instead of like trying to jump. Because if you jump in and try and avoid high shots, essentially, you'll still get hit by getting shot in the foot, essentially. So, but that's just how I play. Now, this is the boss here, which is this giant thing here. This is actually pretty easy. You can just shoot it or just chuck grenades at it or whatever, and it's already dead. Well, again, this is the easy difficulty. And we're already done stage 2. Yeah, that was a fairly short stage, but still pretty fun nevertheless. More loading. And all this FMV does is show that, hey, we blew up the thing. Hooray. That was in the movie. And now Kyle Reese goes in the vehicle. Thankfully, this is not the Terminator 2 arcade game, because then we have to play that level where the truck takes up pretty much the entire screen and we have to somehow protect it, which is like almost impossible. But there are no driving sequences in this game, so we don't have to worry about that at least. I love CD loading times, don't you? Oh, here we go. Now we're in factory. We didn't really see this in the movie, because in the movie it just showed Kyle Reese's perspective on the war through his flashbacks. We didn't actually see him fight through the war and through the factory to get to the time portal in the actual movie. So this is actually pretty interesting in that regard, because it shows us how Kyle Reese essentially went through the war and into the factory to infiltrate it and, go back in time to stop the Terminator. So that's why this is actually a pretty good adaptation. Because there are some liberties done here, and they're little Terminator dogs, so watch out for those. Those are actually pretty fast. But like I said, the liberties done in this game, in comparison to the movie, they're pretty loose, I'll admit, because you're pretty much playing as Kyle through the entire game. But it's still done pretty well in that regard of like just a straight up movie game progression kind of thing. Because it's pretty much like what most people would expect from an actual good movie game, really. Just something that's not, too outlandish, or, and something that has the right amount of effort put into it. Something that's obviously not just, slapped together for the movie release, because this was made in like '93, and the Terminator movie was released in '84. So the Terminator games, this was pretty much made after Terminator 2, which also had a slew of pretty bad games at times. So in that regard, I think it's interesting that adaptations of movies that were made, like almost 10 years ago at this point, can have some actual thought and effort put into it. And, not just be a rushed corresponding release for the movie. This level is fairly large, as you can see. And if you notice here, there's like a pipe. You can actually go up those. Here I couldn't really figure out how to do it at first, but I can go back to it in a second here after I blow up this guy. And you have to jump and press up. There we go. And that pipe had some pipe bombs in it, I think. Or not pipe bombs. In the future, they're grenades, actually. And, yeah, you want to blow up those big rolling things as soon as possible. Because you can destroy them with just your gun, but they take several hits. So it's best to just chuck a grenade at them. Grenades are very effective against those things. Oh, and one thing I should mention about the aiming. Because you can't really aim down or anything, but also on slopes, you can only really aim parallel to the slope when you're just standing. However, you can aim straight up, and if you duck on a slope, you'll aim straight ahead. So there is a little bit of aiming adjustments you can make, but it's not as fluent as, say, Contra, and I'm just rocking out to the music here. Very good music by Tommy Tallarico in this game. The best thing about owning a Sega CD game is you can actually put the CD in your computer and you can actually rip the actual music from the CD. And this giant thing here can take a lot of your health, but grenades can take care of it very easily. And we just clear that level, and I'll see you in the next part.